Oh, welcome back. There is outrage today over the sentence given to a Texas teenager who killed 4 people while driving drunk. A juvenile court judge sentenced Ethan Couch to 10 years of probation, but no jail time for the fatal crash over the summer. Prosecutors had asked for the maximum 20 years. Couch's defense attorneys blamed his rich parents for the boy's behavior. One defense witness, a psychologist, testified that Couch suffered from something they referred to as affluenza, meaning that his parents' permissive attitude made him think he could get away with anything. After the sentencing, Eric Boyles, who lost his wife and daughter in that crash, had this reaction.
Well, Ethan has had a privileged life, and money has always been there, and money always seems to keep Ethan out of trouble. This was one time I did ask the court that for justice and that for money not to prevail. And ultimately today I felt like money did prevail.
Joining me now, former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst Kendall Coffee. Kendall, thanks for your time here. We heard from Eric Boyles there that money, in his opinion, prevailed here. The psychologist who testified, a defense witness, in addition to saying that Ethan Couch had affluenza, that the boy was brought up to never believe you apologize, but instead you would give money as a substitute for even apologizing. As a defense attorney with a very successful career, prosecutor, as a very successful prosecutor, have you ever heard anything like this?
Never. And as astonishing as the sentence is, no jail time, 4 dead, 1 paralyzed, driving under the influence of alcohol, not under the influence of affluenza. This theory of a spoiled rich kid defense is truthfully appalling. It turns everything in our justice system upside down. And if there is a condition such as affluenza, let me tell you what the treatment is. The treatment is full accountability under our criminal justice system. No more, no less accountability than anybody else, including prison time if it's deserved.
You've worked with a lot of judges. You know them, former federal prosecutor for years. Kendall, what could this judge have been thinking here?
Well, the judge certainly had courage because she had to know this was an unpopular decision. But the best I can determine is her sole focus was rehabilitation, what would be best for the defendant, as opposed to fairness for the victims whose losses were not truly respected and whose anguish was deepened. Rehabilitation is a legitimate consideration in juvenile sentencing, but it's not the only one.
Yeah.
There has to be accountability. There has to be respect for victims.
The obvious retort to that is, well, where is that sentiment when the child is poor? When the person says, listen, I grew up in a small town and never met my father and I never had guidance, so I turned to a life of crime. I mean, it's being offered up to this individual. His parents even at one point offered Kendall to pay $450,000 a year to send him to a private facility for therapy to avoid a jail sentence. I want to also play what his defense attorney, Scott Brown, said after the sentencing when he was asked about the consequences that Ethan has faced, or the lack thereof, in his life. Let's listen.
Well, the consequences are he's taken away from his family. He's taken away from all the things that he's been given. He's not going to have the truck to drive. He's not going to have all the other things that he's used to. He's not going to have his Xbox. He's not going to have alcohol or drugs. Taking him away from his family and teaching him to be a responsible citizen, that's a consequence.
He's not going to have his Xbox. Your reaction to that?
I'm grief-stricken. No Xbox. I'll tell you how to keep someone, if he needs to be somewhat removed from his parents. Prison will do that too. And I want to come back to something you just mentioned. What about a poor child who, through no fault of his or her own, is a victim of abuse, physical abuse, lives in a community that's fraught with peril, drugs, and makes some mistakes in life? Does the system forgive you for that?
Yeah.
There's not hardly any forgiveness at all.
Shauna,
but if you're rich, I'm sorry, Tamron, but the contrast is just so dramatic between rich and poor, as illustrated by this case.
Shauna Jennings, the widow of the minister, a minister who was one of the victims, one of the people who died, said to Ethan, "You lived a life of privilege and entitlement, and my prayer is that it does not get you out of this. My fear is that it will get you out of this." And it seems it did. But from the legal perspective, people often don't have faith in the justice system. They believe that money can get you out of these things. As someone who believes in our justice system, Kendall, how do you reconcile this?
You just have to say this hardly ever happens. But that's not quite so. The truth is the rich can get the best lawyers, and that can make a difference. And there are situations where they get a benefit. This is an extreme example, Tamron. I don't want you and your viewers to think that this kind of thing happens every day. But day in, day out, is it better to be rich or is it better to be poor when you face our justice system? I think we all know the truth about that.
Well, the families of the victims are suing the Couch family, and we'll see what happens with that part of this case. But nevertheless, this is just absolutely unsettling. Thank you very much, Kendall.